Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It is my genuine pleasure to be with you on a Tuesday evening, and glad to take your phone calls and emails in just a moment. And we're always glad to welcome back to the program Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, who's the president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy and the author of A Battle for the Soul of Islam, an American Muslim patriot's fight to save his faith. Dr. Jasser, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you, Lars. It's always great to be with you.
I just had a young lady call the show, and she said, Islam or Sharia Islam is incompatible with the kind of democratic society that we live in America today. How would you answer that?
I would say that Islamism, which is a huge, large global movement of those that seek, it's a theopolitical movement that seeks to create Islamic states, whether it be the Brotherhood in Egypt, the Islamists of Tunisia, the Wahhabis of Saudi Arabia, the Khomeinists of Iran, the Taliban, ISIS is the most militant version. Yes, that is incompatible. But Islam, the faith, I think if it can evolve the way Christianity evolved through an American Revolution against theocracy, can prove itself to be compatible. I would tell her, as somebody on the front lines, that is our battle that we're fighting. We do have yet to prove it, but I would say that there is no mandate in the Quran or otherwise that tells the theocrats that that's the only way to do it. That we do have the ability for reform on our side, but that currently we'll see if that was true, the 10 million that went to the streets against the Brotherhood would not have been Muslims, and the majority were Muslims that didn't want the Brotherhood running their government in Egypt.
That's a very good point. We're hearing just tonight about an American citizen, an American man, who's reported to have been killed in Syria, who was there to fight alongside the Islamic State, whether it's ISIL or ISIS. But he was there fighting, and I guess it just makes you wonder. I guess, am I correct in assuming that if he was fighting along with ISIS, he undoubtedly was an adherent of Islam?
Absolutely. All Islamists are Muslim, but not all Muslims are Islamists. It's like many citizens in history can be against communism, and not all communists were Soviets. And ultimately, though the threat of communism was not as significant as the threat of the Soviet threat, but it was still a incompatible ideology with Western ideas. So, Islamism has many different forms. The threat now, we see in Syria, and I'll tell you this as an American of Syrian descent, the revolution in Syria is a righteous revolution. It didn't start with the Islamists. It started with small towns that were fighting against one of the most ruthless dictators in the Middle East, if not the most ruthless. And ultimately, as I tried to tell Congress in 2011, the population would be radicalized, and Assad has used al-Qaeda and the militants as a foil to legitimize genocide and dictatorship, as many dictators do in the Middle East. And Jenner and others have talked about in the Wall Street Journal repeatedly on how it's sort of not an accident that the areas of ISIS in northern Syria have been left alone while the more moderate neighborhoods have been decimated. And that sort of answers the question of throughout the Middle East of how these dictators and monarchs have conveniently allowed Islamism to thrive because it legitimizes an autocratic form of government to prevent the third pathway, which would be liberty.
Dr. Jasser, you wrote recently, bringing this back to the United States and exactly what we've been talking about. You wrote, even in America, leading Muslim organizations and clerics bully with threats of ostracism those Muslims who dare to dissent. Old guard ideologues used to monopoly control make it crystal clear to their Muslim critics. Take us on and we will make an example of you as a traitor to the Muslim community. And you've felt the backlash of that, haven't you?
We have. And, I've up until now, I've been doing this for over 15 years, and especially since 9/11, we formed our organization. I've tried to leave my own community out of it here in Arizona, but more recently, with the conflict in Gaza, I've taken on Hamas on Fox and elsewhere, and I guess now they've crossed the line, and we saw the last sermon at my own mosque, basically without saying my name, say that there are Muslims amongst us who are not with us, who we must speak out against, et cetera, et cetera. And they're basically telling people, if you don't toe the line of the Brotherhood and if you speak ill of Hamas and other militant movements, you become part of the problem and you're not part of the quote-unquote ummah or the Muslim community. And this tribalism, this groupthink is the oxygen for political Islam. And, until we confront this more moderate ideology here, which is not militant and not violent, it is the gateway drug to what creates ISIS groups. So you find in America, rather than Muslims really giving sermons about ISIS and Hamas and Boko Haram, they're targeting individuals like me, showing you that the victimization mantra is what dominates the bandwidth, so that's why reform isn't happening.
In fact, the fact that they referred to those who go on Fox News and speak ill against our Muslim brothers and sisters, they were undoubtedly referring to you because you're one of the most prominent Muslim voices on Fox News, one of the few. And the fact that you go on and are critical of these groups who use religion as an excuse to throw missiles at their neighbors, I applaud you for those efforts. I think it's fantastic that you're willing to do it. And I was just bemoaning about an hour ago why it is that we don't hear a larger outcry from American Muslims who want to simply practice their religion and live alongside those who don't practice Islam, that there isn't a bigger outcry to say, well, we've got to stop this, or Islam will be viewed as the enemy.
You know, my family and I sat down and we said, enough is enough. We're not going to allow them to continue to smother the moderate voices. And this is how they do it. And why I penned that piece for the Arizona Republic is I wanted people to know this is why you don't hear more moderate voices. We get labeled as Uncle Toms. And if we try to take on the radicals and militants and talk about the areas that need reform and talk about the fact that we need to in the 12-step program, we get labeled as the enemy. And I think it's very important that Americans understand the agenda and the lens through which we need to set to tackle this problem, which every Muslim community needs to begin to address. And unless the non-Muslims, the majority of Americans, begin to push these buttons to be done, it's going to continue to leave us in a pre-9/11 mentality.
Dr. Zuhdi Jasser is the author of A Battle for the Soul of Islam. Dr. Jasser, it's always a pleasure. Keep up the good work on Fox. And as they say, il carborundum, non carborundum, don't let the bastards grind you down.
We won't. This is about American security, and this country gave us freedom that nowhere else did, so we're not going anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jasser.